can say anything to you, and you have no way of checking up on it. Then the president can come up before the mic and say, we've got to go to war in order to do something about terrorism. Or we've got to go to war to bring democracy to the Middle East. Or we've got to go to war because someday this little beleaguered, ruined nation may attack us. You know, if you don't know any history, well, you have no cause for, well, being skeptical. If you know some history, if you know how many times governments have lied, if you know the history of American foreign policy, if you know how many times the nation has gotten into war on the basis of deceiving the public and telling them things about, how we're doing this to save civilization, we're doing it for democracy. If you know the history of the Mexican War, we're going into Mexico. Well, first of all, we're going to Mexico because there was some clash on the border and they fired at us. Well, you know, all these little incidents that presumably are occasions for war. You know, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, they fired, you know, at our ships in the Gulf of Tonkin. Where's the Gulf of Tonkin? It must be off the coast of San Francisco. Those Vietnamese must have really, firing at our ships off the coast of San. No. I mean, did Americans know where the Gulf of Tonkin was? No, they fired at us, and then it turns out they were lying about all of that. They were lying about the occasion for starting a war in the Philippines. The Filipino soldiers fired at us, and nobody asked, what were we doing in the Philippines? It's not it's not New Jersey. So we're going into Mexico to bring civilization to the Mexicans. Well, no. That's where the business of interest comes in. The government tells you they're doing this for one thing. No, the government has its own interests. The slaveholders of the 1840s had their interests. They wanted more slave territory. President Polk had his own interest, expanding the nation. You know, leaders of countries always love expansion. I mean, it's true of any institution. Institutions love to expand, right? And, of course, some of the expansions are rather peaceful, and other expansions are violent and deadly. And generally, the expansion of nations are violent and deadly, as our expansion. So we took, you know, half of Mexico, and therefore got all this beautiful territory in the Southwest, right? Well, why do we have all these Spanish names around? Why is California full of Santa Cruzes and Santa thises and Santa that is? That's Mexican territory, which we stole from them in an aggressive war, lying to the American public. You know, and now we have to build a wall. We have to build a wall along the southern border to keep the Mexicans out of the country that we stole from them. Really, it's. You know, history, history of the turn of the century, history of the war in Cuba, the great Spanish-American War, Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Rider. I remember those things. I don't know how much of that they still teach in school. They always taught a lot of nonsense in school, and they probably still teach a lot of nonsense in school, you know. And, you know, heroism, military heroism, Theodore Roosevelt, the Rough Rider. What in the world were we doing in Cuba? What are we still doing in Cuba? What are we always doing in Cuba? They're too close to us. You know, they threaten us. Cuba is dangerous. Well, actually, we're going into Cuba to save the Cubans from Spain. And it's true. Very often there's a half-truth. Sometimes it's not a total lie. Let's grant that. Sometimes there's a half-truth. We're going into Cuba in 1898 to save the Cubans from Spanish tyranny. And it's true. Spain was a tyrannical ruler of Cuba. So we go into Cuba and we free the Cubans from Spain, but not from us. Spain is gone, we are in. Spain is gone, United Fruit is in. Vanderbilt and the railroads are in. American corporations are in, and from now on, Cuba is basically ours. They don't call it a colony, but it acts like a colony. We support every dictator in Cuba until one. It's interesting, you know. We loved all those dictators in Cuba, but this guy, we loved the dictators who loved us. When you have a dictator who doesn't love us, boo, that's bad. But we went into Cuba and killed, you know, a number of people died. Our soldiers died, their soldiers. Actually, more of our soldiers died from poisoned beef that were given to the soldiers than died in battle. You know that? Thousands of American soldiers died as a result of eating poisoned beef given to them by the meatpacking houses of Chicago. War profiteering. It's always gone on, right? You make a profit. You don't care what happens to the soldiers. So we took Cuba, and in the course of it, you know, in the midst of it, we decide we're going to go over and take the Philippines. And that's true. Cuba is close to us. The Philippines is far away, but it doesn't matter. You know, the world, it's a small world. Philippines are going to be useful. They're just off the coast of China. It's a nice place to have. And so we go into Cuba, fight a war in Cuba, to bring, as President McKinley said, to bring civilization and Christianity to the Filipinos. God, he said, told him to take the Philippines. It's getting to be a habit of presidents saying that God told them to do this and God told them to do that. You see, God is a registered member of the Republican Party. You know, and God, you know. After all, we sing "God Bless America," right? God is on our side. Hey, doesn't God care about other people? Doesn't he care about the other people that we invade? Why does he only care about us? No, God told McKinley to take the Philippines and bring civilization and Christianity to them. So we go into the Philippines, and while the war in Cuba was a short war, 3 months, one of our diplomats called it a splendid little war. But the war in the Philippines lasted for years. Hundreds of thousands of Filipinos were killed in that war. Atrocities on our side. The killing of children. That's what happened in the Philippines. It's interesting that in our history books, the Spanish-American War, this is what I remember. I don't know if it's still true. When I was going to school, the Spanish-American War in Cuba took a lot of space. The war in the Philippines, very little. But the war in the Philippines was a very long and brutal war, a kind of precursor of the war in Vietnam with all its massacres and so on. And so on and on, you know. And all these recent wars, and of course the war in Vietnam. It's amazing how much people have forgotten about the war in Vietnam. If people really remembered the history of the war in Vietnam, they would never have agreed to go into Iraq. You know, the lies told about Vietnam. We're going to bring democracy to the Vietnamese. We believe in self-determination. It's interesting. You believe in self-determination. In other words, you believe those people should determine their destiny. Therefore, you send a force of 500,000 troops into their country. You know, it's history. Yes, history can put you on guard, and maybe that's not why we're not getting a lot of really good and intelligent and critical history. Because I don't know, the guardians of our culture get nervous when you get critical. And sometimes when you start talking about this history and you talk about the United States as an expansionist power, first we expanded across the continent, you know, all benign, right? We just expanded. It's like a biological thing. You expand, you see. And I remember the maps in the schoolroom. You know, oh, Louisiana Purchase. Mexican Cession. Nothing about a war. Mexican Cession. Louisiana Purchase. Everything's done. We just bought these territories. What about the violence? What about the fact that in the Louisiana Territory there lived hundreds of Indian tribes which we had to expel and annihilate in order to make that was our expansion, you see. And And if you start talking